Hey, everybody, I'm Rick Sanchez. This is Jay Speak. Sorry I put you off for a day or two, but you know what? I got diverticulitis. Ugh, sucks. Hurts like crazy. Still going through it, but I think I'm hopefully getting over it real soon. What I wanted to bring you was my interview with Scott Ritter because I really think the world of Scott. You know, I used to interview Scott back in the old days when I was on CNN and when I was on NBC, when they allowed you to interview Scott Ritter in those places. Today, Scott Ritter couldn't be anywhere near the CNN or NBC or even Fox News buildings because he's not a neocon and they won't put you on the air over there unless you are a neocon. And that's sick. If you're John Bolton, hell yeah, come on in as many times a day as you want. That's crazy. Now, here, the first part of the conversation I want to share with you between me and Scott Ritter is when Scott tells me about what it was like when he was trying to stop the world from allowing this invasion of Iraq, which was complete bullshit based on lies and a made up story. And he's one of the brave people, only ones, there were so few, who actually stood up and said, no, there are no weapons of mass destruction here. We're lying. I am a UN weapons inspector. Damn it, I would know. And he pissed so many people off. But you know what happened? He actually, I've never knew this. Maybe you have. I looked it up and apparently he talked about it before. He was actually offered a bribe of $6 million back then to go along with the war. Here it is.
Exceptionalism is Scott Ritter standing up to the powers of the world at that time, the Western world, who were trying to tell us that we should go to war with Iraq because they had everything to do with 9/11. They didn't. And because they had weapons of mass destruction, which they didn't. It would have been so easy for Scott Ritter to just go along to get along at that time. And
not just easy, but profitable.
Yes, right?
I had a $6 million offer put on the table in front of me by a very senior American official. All I had to do is play the game.
Really?
Yeah.
$6 million.
Yeah.
All you had to do was say, yep, I saw the weapons of mass destruction.
I didn't even have to do that. I just had to insinuate that Saddam was a liar, a cheater, and that weapons of mass destruction could exist in Iraq.
Why couldn't you do that?
Because it wasn't true. But the main reason why I couldn't do it is we go back to the Marine roots.
Yeah.
You see, when I joined the Marine Corps, I joined to serve my country. Now, I understand that I don't get to make the decisions about when we go to war and who we go to war with. That's the decision my leadership does. My job is to be prepared to carry out the mission when given by the government. But it's important that the mission be one worthy of the sacrifice we're asking the Marines to make. I know what we're asking of these Marines. I've been to war. And I know that when we go to war, people die. We kill a lot of them, but they can kill a lot of us.
Yeah.
And how do you write a letter home to a parent that says, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, sad to inform you that your son, Corporal John Smith, has died in combat? And how do I write a letter that makes them think beyond the tragedy to say, this was a sacrifice. The cause was worth the sacrifice.
It was worthy of your son's life.
Parents who receive letters that your son, your husband died on D-Day, died on Iwo Jima, at least they could be told that they died in they sacrificed in support of a cause worthy of the sacrifice. But to sit there and say, I'm going to lie to make $6 million so that we can go to war that we fought by Marines who are going to die. How do you write that letter to the parents? You can't.
Yeah.
You can't write that letter. So, it just wasn't going to happen. Trust me, there were many times since then where I'm like, when you're looking at the bills and you're looking at the bank account and you're going, God, how do I square this?
Know.
You're going, $6 million would have paid for a lot of,
Not to mention, and we should maybe share this with our audience that's watching from all over the world, that not only was it the opportunity cost of what you didn't get that you could have gotten had you been less principled, but on top of everything else, for telling the truth, you were punished, maligned, and oftentimes criticized unnecessarily.
Yeah, I can handle that. I mean,
You're a big guy.
Well, it's not just that, but if you believe in what you're doing, then you have to be willing. Again, it comes back, you talk about your parents being a big factor for you.
Yeah.
Mine were the same way. I'll make this a short story, but I got in a fight in high school defending my sister's honor. And I got put down in the principal's office, and he called my father, and he said, your son's here. My father said, okay, why are you calling me? He said, well, your son was in a fight. Why are you calling me? Well, there's a penalty for fight. Why are you calling me? Was my son in a fight? Yes. Is there a penalty for fighting? Yes. Why are you calling me? He said, well, I have to suspend him. My father said, why are you calling me? So they suspended me.
Right.
So I got home, and I'm like, Dad, what? And he said, first of all, he said, I'm so proud of you for standing up for your sister. And had you not stood up for your sister, I would be ashamed. He said, so I'm proud of you. You're worthy of being my son. I said, so why didn't you come to me? He said, no. There are consequences for action.
Yes.
And if you're going to take a correct action, thinking that you won't pay any consequences, it becomes easy to do.
You still broke a rule. Right.
You have to be willing to pay the price for what you've done. And if you believe in what you've done, then it's a price you have to be willing to pay. I was told when I decided to resign from the United Nations, I was told by the head of the CIA station in New York that the FBI was going to come at me for the rest of my life. He said straight up, if you resign, they will come after you, your family, your loved ones, everything forever. Are you prepared for that? Well, how can you say you're prepared for something like that? But I said, that's a price I have to be willing to pay to do the right thing. And they've been coming after me for, what has it been now? 31 years, so.
Iraq war was based on a lie, and you were one of the few voices that stood up and described that lie. And we went to war anyway. Yeah. And today, everybody in the world seems to know we did it for a lie. And I guess we just move on to the next one.
Yeah, but they don't admit it was a lie. It was a mistake. You see, I mean, the decision maker.
But it wasn't a mistake.
No, they knew exactly what they were doing. The lie was manufactured to cover for it. But see, it's too easy. For instance, in the mainstream media, they say, well, we were lied to.
Yeah.
Well, isn't your job in the mainstream media to work through the lies?
Of course.
And if your job was to work through your lies, you had a guy named Scott Ritter, who was a chief weapons inspector running the intelligence programs, who knew everything about the WMD, telling you that this is a lie, and yet you ignored him. You went straight with the government message.
Right.
So it wasn't a lie.
I worked at CNN. I worked at Fox News. I worked at NBC. Scott, you know this. My job, especially when I was sitting at the anchor desk, I would get information tossed to reporter X, who's sitting at the State Department. They have breaking news. And then that reporter would literally say whatever they were just handed by the apparatchiks at the State Department, and they would report the news. So really, this Pentagon correspondent or this State Department correspondent or this White House correspondent, they're essentially apparatchiks themselves these days.
There was
in the United
only
States.
one news host who would call me up and ask me to come on and talk about the issue seriously. Only one.
Wow.
You. You were it. No one else. You were the only one who called me on, and you said a couple times, you know, they don't want me to talk to you, but let's do it.
Exactly.
So again, I thank you for being the man to going for the truth.
Well, thank you, and I think that's important. And since we're into a little bit of this folkloric conversation about believing in things like principles that too often people don't believe in, you gave me this recently, and you said the next time we see each other on air, I want to make sure you show it. So I made that promise to you. Remember?
Yes, and you showed it. But now the problem is you've put it on the table. It's a challenge coin.
What does that mean?
I don't have mine on me.
Oh.
I owe you a drink.
Here's another important discussion point between me and Scott, and it's the question about the United States being a true mediator in all of this. Because you really have to ask yourself, if the United States is providing weapons for Ukraine, directly or indirectly, who cares, right? And offering to give them more weapons, i.e. a Tomahawk missile. And if the United States is punishing economic news to the Russians by way of record sanctions and other castigations of that matter, well, then how can they call themselves neutral in this discussion? I mean, after all, they're not sanctioning Ukraine, right? And they're certainly not giving weapons to Russia. So it really is confusing for me, and I've always wondered if that's something we should actually address, and we did. Here's this conversation with me and Scott.
I think in many ways, what I think, and I believe you believe this as well, is that it has to get away from being Ukraine versus Russia, when in actuality, in many ways, it's the West versus Russia, and it's the United States versus Russia. Let me speak plainly, and then let me get your reaction. The United States is not sanctioning Ukraine, it's sanctioning Russia. Correct. The United States is not giving weapons to Russia, it's giving weapons to Ukraine. So it's hard not to look at this in a black and white manner and say, I know you're calling yourselves mediators, and we appreciate that, the rest of us in the world. Happy to see that you're trying to come into this squabble and end it, but you're not really a mediator. You're a player.
You're an active participant.
You're wearing a uniform.
You're not just wearing a uniform. You're not a private, a corporal, a sergeant. You're the general.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing, is that it's not that just that we're a part of this system, we're leading this system. People need to remember that the United States had a policy under the Biden administration that sought the strategic defeat of Russia. Trump hasn't changed that policy. And we know this because he continues to articulate aspects. For instance, when Scott Bessent says, I can collapse the Russian economy, that's part of a strategic plan to bring down Russia. And just so people understand, the strategic defeat of Russia isn't the battlefield. It's designed to bring about economic collapse, which brings about societal collapse, which brings about political collapse.
Right.
It is a plan to regime change.
Biden said it. He used those words.
He wants Vladimir Putin out of office,
right.
And that continues to be the official policy of the United States, no matter how friendly Trump appears to be with Putin. Until which time Trump changes his policy, articulates it in public, what can Russia do? Because Russia knows behind the scenes they're continue to push. Bessent's words prove this. They want Russia to collapse. They want a change in the regime. So Trump has to change that. How can you trust the actor? This is another problem with arms control.
Right.
They want arms control. But the Russians are like, arms control is pretty cool. We understand the necessity of it. It's nice. But why would we even begin to negotiate limits on our strategic nuclear deterrent at a time when you're seeking our strategic defeat? Because the one thing that guarantees we will never be defeated is our strategic nuclear deterrent. Mm-hmm. It's a wall I run into every time I'm trying to promote arms control, and I talk to Russians about it. And they're like, that's an old concept, Scott. It doesn't work anymore because your country can't be taken seriously.
Let me follow up with you on that point that we just made about the United States is basically giving Ukraine weapons, and they're castigating Russia in many, many ways. So they're not really a neutral party in this. So the only way for this to be handled properly is for the United States to come to Russia first and say, we want to be a neutral party. It means we're going to start lifting sanctions off of you, and we're going to stop giving weapons to Ukraine. Now you're a neutral party. The moment you do that, my opinion, I'm not an expert in military affairs like you are. My opinion, you just ended the Ukraine war when you do that.
Absolutely. But there's a problem because the United States, it's the United States that got Europe involved in this project.
Yes.
Because Biden,
and Obama.
Correct. But I mean, Obama first. Look, let's be honest, Trump. This is Donald Trump's war. He keeps saying it's not my war. It's his war. His first term in presidency, the Russians know exactly what he did. He provided weaponry. He encouraged 20 CIA bases were built in Ukraine to spy on Russia, including preparations for deep direct action opportunities. Our special forces were in teaching. All these Ukrainian special operations that are taking place on Russian soil were trained by the United States. Intelligence was given. There were American attacks on Russian soil indirectly. The same thing with the British. The Russians know this. That was Donald Trump that made that happen, that created that. So it's his war. He just doesn't want to. But the United States sucked Europe into a war they really didn't want to fight. Mm-hmm. And the Europeans now have committed extreme levels of political and economic capital to the renovation of NATO, making Europe prepared to fight a war with Russia. And so it's not going to be so easy for the United States to
So I think what you're saying, you're almost saying our president, your president and my president, wants to do that, but he just can't.
The system is not geared towards that. I'm not saying he can't. I'm saying he can't do it as quickly as you and I would like him to do it. That there is so much entangled deep state nonsense, political nonsense. For instance, in order to do what you said, if you do it precipitously, where's NATO? Because basically it says we're walking away from NATO. This president's not prepared to do that. I think he might want to do that, but politically he can't do that. Remember, midterm elections, perceptions create their own realities. So this president has to play perceptions so that he's not seen as weak.
I do believe, by the way, that things are shifting in the even in Europe. A field marshal came out the other day, Lord David Richards. He is one of the highest-ranking British officers, right? And he's doing an interview with the Independent. This guy's got 5 stars. And he tells this reporter of the Independent, who, by the way, tries to argue with him. He says, look, let's just be real clear about this. Ukraine is losing this war and cannot win this war. And the only way that Ukraine could possibly win this war is if the NATO troops went in there and started fighting the war for them, because they don't have enough soldiers. I mean, they're losing, 290,000 Ukrainian soldiers have deserted or left the battlefield, and they can't find them. Can you imagine? That's what this guy's talking about. It's interesting, by the way, because I was monitoring this interview and reading the story, and the interviewer with the British reporter, of course, who's as bad as the guys at CNN, tries to argue with them and say, no. They would be fine if they just had enough weapons, if we just gave them more weapons. And this Lord David Richards, this decorated field marshal, calls bullshit on him. Here it is.
I'm going to quote now Field Marshal David Richards. He is a commander, one of the top-ranking commanders in the British military, of all people, to be saying this. He says, quote, Ukraine cannot defeat Russia. It's absolutely impossible. They don't have enough manpower. They didn't have manpower enough to begin with, and they certainly don't have it now.
Yeah, and let me put a...
And this is a Brit.
Let me put, who are the most violent, war-prone people against Russia.
Yeah.
Let me put the Ritter corollary onto that. Europe cannot defeat Russia. Europe doesn't have enough manpower. Now, people will say, well, Scott, come on, Europe's population.
Yeah.
The Germans, and the German government's one of the most rabid when it comes to, posturing about the potential necessity of war with Russia by 2028, 2029. 16% of the German male population has said if Germany was invaded, they'd be willing to die for their country. 16%.
Wow.
All right? That's if Germany was invaded. Now imagine if Germany goes off to fight a war of aggression on another continent. You're not going to get the Germans mobilized to do that. You're not going to get Europe. European people do not want to go to war with Russia. And because Russia's not coming to them.
Yeah.
In order to fight Russia, they would have to go to Russia. Europe doesn't have enough manpower. They don't have enough money. They don't have enough military power. So this general statement is 100% correct. The problem is the politicians have fooled themselves into believing that they actually... Listen to Mark Rutte speak.
Yeah.
Listen to Starmer speak. They all speak, as if they have this massive army behind them. They've got nothing.
By the way, speaking of Europe, there's something else that's going on there. You know, all these tech bros, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of them, who are very brave and very pro-Ukraine. But when the war with Ukraine, with Russia broke out, they left. They're living in Europe. They're living in Estonia and living in Poland, and they're all over the place, scattered all around Europe. Well, apparently the gig is up, because European countries are now applying measures to get rid of them. They're spending billions and billions of dollars on these people who are collecting essentially welfare while they're living in Europe. And they don't need the money, because many of them had money to begin with. As usual in wars, the wealthy leave and the poor are the ones who end up fighting. The very poor right now in Ukraine, because they're out of soldiers. They're using basically young people and very old people. But yeah, these tech pros are now being told to get the hell out of Europe. We're tired of you, which is another sign, just like the field marshal's quote, that Europe is finally saying, you know what, enough with this Ukraine thing. Here's my conversation with Scott about this.
In Germany and in several other countries around Europe, including Poland, and at least one other, which doesn't come to memory right now, they are literally trying to kick out all the Ukrainian refugees who are there, and they're telling them, you're no longer going to be on our welfare system and you're no longer going to be able to get checks. You know, the party's over. You've been here way too long and we just can't afford to support you anymore. We don't have enough money for ourselves. Similar to kind of what the United States message has been with many of their immigrants. Interesting that that would be happening right now. It reinforces the general's message and the message to me that Europe is finally saying enough.
Well, it's politics. You know, when it was politically viable, economically viable, Europe did this whole open borders, bring in the immigrants thing.
It's cost them billions of dollars.
Well, it's a losing proposition. They've ruined their societies because they didn't have effective plans for integration, and they've ruined their economies. And on top of that, this is parallel tracking with the disaster that is Ukraine. And so now they have collapsing economies. They're sending money to Ukraine to defend, sending money to Ukraine. Germany's talking about the reduction of social welfare programs. And then you have this huge Ukrainian refugee population.
And they're all wealthy Ukrainians who left and didn't want to fight.
Well, that's the whole thing.
I mean,
you're at a time when they're saying, the general, Ukraine doesn't have enough manpower. Well, geez, you got a couple 100,000 military-age fighting men, but they're not men. They're boys hiding behind their mama's skirts in a foreign country. Real men would say, I mean, look, I believe that Ukraine has patriots.
Of course.
Most of those patriots are dead.
And the Ukrainians are great people.
They're great people. And, you know, there's that old story from Bakhmut where the Russians surrounded Ukrainian soldiers in the basement and said, brothers, come out. We won't kill you. You fought bravely. Come out. And you know what Ukrainian soldiers shouted back? Russians don't surrender. Because at their heart, they're the same damn people. The same people. And they died because Russians don't surrender. Ukrainians, you know, let's put the banderas aside. The Ukrainian people are good people. They're brothers, cousins, sisters, uncles, mothers, fathers of the Russian population. And they're the ones paying the price. You remember when the war started, how many hundreds of thousands of Russians fled? The Navalny people. The fake Russians. I'm sorry, I apologize to anybody. I'm sorry, but they fled. These are the equivalent. These are the Navalny Ukrainians who fled because they don't love their country enough to stand up and defend it.
We've seen, as a matter of fact, I was just over the weekend preparing for this interview, and I looked at some of the latest stats on the people who are deserting in the Ukrainian army. It's mind-boggling. And if you look at the stat, you know, it literally goes up and up and up and up, almost as if with each passing month they have more and more desertions and they're running out of more and more soldiers. Meanwhile, from all reports that I've seen that are credible, most men in Russia are still wanting to they're still voluntarily joining the Russian army.
Contract soldiers. It's like, I mean, you know, in America,
what does that say to you as a military guy?
It means that people are willing to fight and die for their country here, that there's a cause worthy of the sacrifice. Whereas in Ukraine, the Ukrainians no longer believe in the cause, that they're confused about the cause, and that...
That's big, isn't it?
Look, the Ukrainians have proven that they can die on the battlefield. Die bravely on the battlefield. Meaning that, you know, there are Ukrainians who believe in the cause of Ukraine, defending Ukraine, et cetera. And I just had dinner with Abdi Aladanov last night, and he said, you know, when you face a brave enemy, you don't want to kill that enemy. You want that enemy to survive, because when the war ends and that man is returned to his mother, the mother needs to know that the Russians are people with empathy, with a heart, with a soul, that they're not here to kill, that everything she was told bad about the Russians was a lie. Unfortunately, war is being what a war is. These brave men are dying. Now we have people who are conscripted. You know, want to know why we know these statistics? Because the Russians are capturing them. The Russians are feeding them. The Russians are caring for them. And when this war is over, Russia will return these men home to their wives, to their mothers, to their loved ones. And these people will know that Russia wasn't what Ukrainian propaganda said Russia was. We're looking at when the men, there's a sexist statement of me, but when the men of a nation are no longer willing to sacrifice their lives for that nation, they haven't just lost faith in the nation. They've lost faith in their family, in their society, in everything. you know, you and I both know that we would die to defend our family.
Of course.
And then we also believe, you know, and that goes up. What's the circle where you stop and say, I'm not willing to die for this cause anymore?
Yeah.
And in Russia, the Russian men are willing to die for Russia, which means they're willing to die for everything in that circle. The Ukrainian circle is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking.
There's no question the Russians are winning this war, and I think every military expert, including yourself and McGregor and Mearsheimer and other people who are as smart as you are all pretty much
smarter.
are all pretty much saying the same thing.
By the way, Scott also talked more about given the difficult situation for the Ukrainians militarily, given the approval ratings for Zelensky are horrible, and they're probably not going to get any better after the tongue lashing he got at the White House about his ugly suit, which I thought was something like a kabuki dance or something, just watching that. And yet, you know, reporters from Ukraine were there to ask pro-Zelensky question, and then there were also MAGA reporters there to ask pro-Trump questions. Really weird, the whole thing. But anyway, given the condition of the military for Ukraine, given the very sad state of affairs for their cause in terms of how this war is going, what I asked Scott was, since he's a military guy and understands this, why are the Russians moving so slowly? Why aren't the Russians? The Russians have the capacity to just annihilate a lot of these cities like Pokrovsk and others along the way, and yet they're going real slowly around these cities and using a lot of flank maneuvers. And, you know, they're allowing themselves to be criticized in the West with people saying, you see, Russia's army's not so good. They're barely winning. Yeah, they're winning, but it's so slow, so incremental. Why? Here's Scott's reaction.
But why are the Russians going so slowly?
Again, strategically, you know, I am loath to pretend that I can speak on behalf of President Putin.
No. From a military thing. You know military more than I do. I mean,
well, first of all, this didn't start as a war, and people need to understand that. A war, when you draw big arrows, you're talking about the physical destruction of your enemy, the total collapse of society. Yeah. This is a special military operation.
Yeah, it's not Dredden.
So it started, the goal and objective was to get Ukraine to the negotiating table. And so Russia started, they made a move on Kiev, they advanced, but the idea was to show Ukraine the consequences of failure to negotiate. 6 days after the special military operation started, Ukraine went to the negotiating table in Belarus. I think there were 3 rounds of negotiation there. Then they moved to Turkey, ultimately to Istanbul, where we had the Istanbul communique, which was what Russia's goal of the special military operation was, a comprehensive negotiated settlement of all the issues. That's what this war was about. Then Ukraine withdrew from that. $48 billion infusion of military aid, and Russia had to transition to the next phase. And the next phase was the liberation of the Donbass. And then Ukraine did a counterattack. Russia had to stabilize the Surovikin line, mobilize 300,000, et cetera. It was never Russia's goal to drive to Berlin. The goal was always the Donbass first, but then in September of 2022, they were compelled to have referendum, and now you have Kherson, Zaporizhia. So the Russian goal is to take control of the territory that is Russia, but not throw away lives.
So no carpet bombing, no...
Well, the goal isn't the destruction of Ukraine.
Right.
The goal isn't the physical... If it was, Russia could physically destroy Ukraine.
Look how long it's taken to take Pokrovsk. And they still haven't. I mean, it's almost like they're going around, flanking all the way around and circling it rather than going in and...
Plus, those tactics are designed to actually preserve Russian life. Because, look, the Russians learned in Mariupol how deadly urban fighting can be. They learned in Bakhmut how deadly the direct attack in an urban environment is. And so the Russians are like, we're not playing that game. Russia's playing a different game operationally to shape the battlefield, to compel the Ukrainians to withdraw. Unfortunately, it's a war of attrition to kill as many Ukrainians as possible, to lower the numbers. That's the Russian priority. It's not to take territory. It's to wear the Ukrainians down to where they can no longer defend appropriately. But
attrition, right?
But controlled attrition, because it's not just a pure meat grind. This isn't Rzhev. Anybody who studies World War II history will know about Rzhev. You've seen the monument at Rzhev, the soldier with the cranes, and you know, an acknowledgement of this wonderful song about cranes. This isn't that. This isn't where Russia's going to sacrifice 2 million soldiers to create a situation around Stalingrad. Vladimir Putin has met with the mothers and the wives of the fallen, and he understands the importance of those lives that are being sacrificed. And so he is not going to throw away lives needlessly. This war is bloody enough as it is. He's going to accomplish the mission and preserve, because if you start throwing away lives, you're going to have to mobilize. Right now, Russia has a system in place where they receive enough contract soldiers to not only absorb casualties, but to continue to grow, to give them greater opportunities. But if you throw that away, if you squander it in meat grinder assaults, this is a new war. The conversation I had last night about drone warfare and how this is the war that I was trained to fight doesn't exist anymore. This is a whole new war, and if you do it wrong, you die. And so the Russians are doing it right. They're winning. The Russians have always said that they aren't driven by an artificial timeline. They're driven by objectives, and that they will accomplish it. The timeline is what we put on it.
Yeah.
But for the Russians, they're not doing that calendar stuff.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
That interview with Scott, by the way, has already been picked up by a lot of people. And my wife looked at it the other day. We were going through, do a little YouTube thing, and she goes, "Who are all these people who are playing your interview with Scott?" I said, "I don't know. They must have liked it, or they like Scott." So it's great. Listen, the more the merrier. I'm the messenger. I'm a journalist, and I try to gather information and then share it with you all. That's what I'm doing. That's why I'm here in this unique place with this unique opportunity. The show is called Journalistically Speaking. We call it J-Speak for short. I'm Rick Sanchez. If you get a chance, please share it with somebody, or give me a like, or subscribe. That would be the best help of all. We appreciate it very much. Thank you so much. I'm Rick Sanchez, and we'll see you next time.